Thank you, Mr. Marsden and PRS, for calling me again. It's nice to be resurrected from the woodwork to have a captive audience to listen to me, my fellow panelists and everybody else. Let me say that I'm going to do what I'm good at, telling stories. I'm not going to give you lessons on the separation of powers, so you can relax. The question of what is the executive is important. It was raised by Mr. Yadav. The executive is what? The political executive constitutes the Council of Ministers. The executive, meaning people like Keshav and me, and all the whole retinue of joint secretaries, additional secretaries, are the arms who are really implementing the policy. So there is a difference, but in approach, the government of the day carries the bureaucracy with it, and that becomes the executive, both together. One cannot do without the other, unfortunately. Now, in this whole process, I want to take you through years of experience. I won't be very long, don't worry, about having been a joint secretary twice over, an additional secretary, a secretary to government, and then chief secretary of Delhi. Now, this gave me an enormous amount of interface with parliamentarians, with Parliament, with Parliament's committees. And I want to share with you the good, the bad, and the ugly. Starting at the beginning, let's say question hour, when starred questions are tabled and we have to reply. Starred questions in 1 hour out of 20 questions, 1 may come up, maybe 10 may come up, you don't know. And nobody knows whether the MP is going to be present or not. Now, during this process, the amount of back-end work that goes on, you know, every officer of the ministry who is concerned with the subjects drops everything. You cannot have somebody, a relative who is sick or something like that, or some domestic upheaval, nothing. You have to be there. Parliament is supreme. So you have to work. Now, in many ways, question hour can trigger the minister to take decisions. Kidney transplant some years ago, organ transplant some years ago, female feticide, I'm talking about the health sector. These are issues which were getting no primacy. The fact that there was a starred question meant we had to work, we had to literally write a PhD thesis in a very short time. And the minister said, "Ye kyun nahi hum aise karte hain? Why don't we do it this way?" This is the beauty of question hour. Unfortunately, as Keshav said, it is relegated to being a boring time. Let's get over this 1 hour and let me shout about my constituency. I'm sorry about that. Talking about knowledge, now we have consultative committee of Parliament, you have the standing committee, you have the select committee of Public Accounts Committee, so many. I felt bad that an articulate bureaucrat could get away with murder. Parliamentarians and MPs who sit on these committees are so powerful. They could finish you if they knew their facts. They could demolish the kind of statements you're making, but they don't. They accept what you say and they don't question it because they've not read the data. They've not done the homework. Everything is seen from a micro level of my constituency, my malaria, my dengue, my chikungunya, but it doesn't look at the totality of what is happening in the country. What is happening to maternal mortality? What is happening to spacing between children? The kind of populations not the size of the population, but the quality of the population has, if you really look at the track record of questions in Parliament on really burning issues in the social sectors, they are abysmally poor. That is really unfortunate, but the one constituency will be taken up as though that is India. Talking about the question of consultative committees, that is when the minister sits and the members of the consultative committee are there and the officers sit. The officers know very well that it is a chai pani get-together most of the time. You can tell the MPs anything, and the minister also has a very friendly, bonhomie kind of an atmosphere going. Nothing is questioned with the kind of tenacity and perseverance one expects. The executive is to blame completely. We do not do our homework. We know the consultative committee can be taken for granted. I would say the best example, and I'm not being political because I am apolitical by nature and on Twitter also, But the fact is that the one consultative committee which really, really made me think was when Rajiv Gandhi said, every member of parliament will sit through 2 hours to understand what is happening to India's forests. In 2 hours, those MPs of every consultative committee of every ministry was bound to listen to a lecture by an eminent environmentalist, Anil Agarwal, on what was happening to India's environment. They were given a bird's eye view, not a worm's eye view. That made them think, and I think it made them conscious of what we were doing to our country. I also want to say that the standing committees, the ones that are attached to the ministry, are useful at times. It depends how tenacious the chairman is and how much he really, really allows MPs to ask questions which are relevant. A lot of it is hot air, and it's an unfortunate situation. That is where I think that the PRS and all their fellows are of great help, because they can tell the MPs what is the real situation and make them ask questions. I don't know whether they're doing it, but it is a very important area. Instead, the time of the executive goes in answering questions which are really, I would say, in the pecking order, very, very low priority. You gave an assurance in Parliament, you have not stood by that assurance. So all of us have learned, never ever say this shall be done. In any Parliament reply, never say. That is absolutely, your secretary will pull you up if you're a joint secretary and say, never give an assurance. Even if you can give it, never give it. So that is some of the, you might say, the lighter side of what happens. Seema did raise this question about regulators, and Keshav didn't pick it up, but I would like to. I do feel that very often the ministries are giving answers, and the more you raise the level, the more diffuse the reply gets. A very specific question needs to be put to regulators. They are doing a lot of good, but they're also doing a lot of harm. And I think the only Parliament is the place where questions can be raised, because this is something which affects huge areas in industry. For instance, the regulatory commissions for power, the regulatory commissions which are looking into the telecom sector. These are things which affect the common man, and the MPs have a much better idea of what is happening. They could put the right kind of questions. I would like to end with a couple of anecdotes, if I may. They have nothing to do with Parliament. They're more to do with the state legislature. But I would say that I worked in the government of Goa for some time. I was in the Union Territories cadre, so I saw a lot of the country, of course. And I do remember that I accompanied a particular chief minister to meet, and I hope that I'm not going to be hauled over the coals for saying this, because she can be quite difficult. Maneka Gandhi was the Minister for Environment, and I remember this minister walking in with me about some coastal regulations, and she said, "Mr. Chief Minister, you're corrupt. Was your predecessor corrupt?" So the man didn't know what to say. He went out bumbling out of that meeting, got nothing out of her. Second time was Louis Proto Barbosa. He was a chief minister, a very urbane, very sophisticated Goan, loved his wine, loved his guitar and everything. And he came, and she sat eating chocolate biscuits. I sat on the edge of the chair with a notebook. We all scribble. We don't scribble anything of any consequence, but we've been trained to scribble to impress that you're doing something. And she asked the same question to him. She said, "Are you going to pull down those hotels on the coastline, or shall I come personally with a pickaxe and do it?" And he said, this is the difference, please understand the difference. He said what was absolutely the correct situation of the executive, which in this case was the government of Goa, and this was, of course, the central government ministry. It was not Parliament, but she was very much over there as a member of the political executive. And he said to her, she said, "Should I come down and pull down those hotels with a pickaxe personally?" And he said, "With pleasure, madam, you come and do it." And that's where the thing goes. No government of India does not have the army, the police, anything to do anything at all. So ultimately, it is the real implementation lies somewhere else, and the executive does have enormous authority, subordinate as it is. Lastly, I want to talk about the Delhi government in my days, since Seema gave me the option. It has nothing to do with the subject, but it's a lovely subject to talk on. It has everything to do. Well, one more example of Goa, and then I'll go to that. One example of Goa, I came from the mighty government of India. I was in the energy ministry. I was in power. I was a very, very important joint secretary. And I find myself transferred to Goa as a development commissioner. And the day I landed in the morning, that day, I had that many files waiting for me on my table. They were all assembly questions. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, at 2 o'clock assembly started, and I said, how can I ever go through all these files? I called the chief engineer, I was in charge of all PWD and things, and I said, what can you should have told me much earlier, what is all this going on? Look at all the questions, and I really, really went for him. And he just looked at my face and said nothing, and here I was furious. I said, this is no way to run anything. And then I went to the assembly to find what happens in the Goa assembly. They fight about one coconut tree, one tap, one wall, and then I realized there's no point in looking at what those assembly questions are about. But coming back to the Delhi assembly, in my days, it was not a cakewalk because Sheila Dikshit did not have supreme majority. She was herself having a lot of detractors within her own party, what to speak of the opposition. But she handled it with the kind of motherly, grandmotherly kind of her designer saris, which looked as though they were just, picked off the street or something, but they actually were designer saris. She carried off everything with such aplomb because she got us to do the homework. She was very good at making bureaucrats work. If you went to her with a problem, she said, is that something to do with the rules? That's your job. If it's to do with Mayawati, that's my job. See the difference? So she had that way of handling a situation. With the result, we were very prepared for assembly, and it was handled pretty well by and large. We didn't have any scenes. As far as this present situation is concerned, I think I'm the most upset. And because I'm so upset, all my friends and enemies tell me, it's because you had power and authority and you've lost it that you can't bear to see somebody else having an opportunity. I'm sorry to say, all the things that really, really matter to keeping the balance between the executive and the political arm, and between the political arm and the assembly, have been waylaid. Having a 67-member majority is fantastic if you used it to push legislation through. If you use it just to say that, well, whatever is going on, it's a pity, and the citizens of Delhi would be having to face the brunt of what has happened. With those rather unhappy words, I would say thank you.